We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Prime Minister treated us to his 7th relaunch in 18 months. He vowed to take on the dangers that threaten the country. So it was good to see the Minister for Common Sense immediately take up that mantle by announcing a vital crackdown on the gravest of threats, colourful lanyards. Meanwhile, in the real world, after 14 years of Tory government, the prison system is in chaos. Does the Prime Minister think that his decision to let prisoners out 70 days early makes our country more secure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, civil service impartiality is an important principle that we're right to support.
Well, I appreciate he's been busy on the front line of the war against lanyards, but he must have missed this. I was the first to call for 2.5% on defence spending. The last time it happened was under the last Labour government, but it needs a credible plan, not his fantasy economics. But I am disappointed to see that version 7.0 of his time in office doesn't extend as far as answering questions or giving any information on those prisoners he is releasing early. Basic details like how many, where are they, what crimes have they committed. So will he at least guarantee that none of the criminals he is instructing prisoners to release early are considered high risk?
Mr. Speaker, there are strict eligibility criteria in place with exclusions based on public safety, and no one will be put on the scheme if they were deemed a threat.
Just like his £46 billion fully funded. If anyone was looking for the perfect metaphor for this shambolic government, we saw it on Monday. The Prime Minister woke up deciding his latest rebrand was Mr. Security. But within hours, the Tory party was being investigated for accidentally publishing the personal details of hundreds of people. Mr. Speaker, he must be the only tech brother on the continent who can't work a debit card or send an email. But he's not answered my question, so I'll try it again. Are any of the prisoners he is currently letting out early considered to be high risk?
Mr. Speaker, he just showed spectacularly why he's just not fit to lead this country into the future. This country has a proud tradition of leading the world. We led the world when it came to the Industrial Revolution.
I appreciate that all this rebranding is taking all of his time, but he may want to read the recent inspection report into Lewes Prison. On this topic, I've asked him twice about. It documents, page 5, high-risk prisoners being released at short notice without sufficient planning. Page 46, a high-risk prisoner had his release date brought forward, despite a history of stalking, domestic abuse and a restraining order. Their words, he was a risk to children. Does the early release of stalkers, domestic abusers and those considered a risk to children sound like the work of someone who is making the country more secure?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, no one should be put on this scheme if they are a threat to the public. And let me be crystal clear, it does not apply. Let me be absolutely clear, it does not apply to anyone serving a life sentence.
Well, I'm glad to hear that those on life sentences are being released early, and he may not think that releasing domestic abusers is a problem. But Labour has repeatedly called for domestic abusers to be exempt from his scheme to release prisoners early. His government has shamefully ignored those calls. So now we have the evidence that domestic abusers are being released early. The Lewis report, Prime Minister. Will he finally change course and back Labour's calls?
Mr. Speaker, as I've been crystal clear, there is an absolute governor lock on people who are put on the scheme.
He's literally letting criminals out early. Mr. Speaker, the only answer to the question I asked whether domestic abusers should be exempt from his early release scheme from anyone serious about security is yes. Perhaps the most ludicrous part of the Prime Minister's speech on Monday was when he said he won't accept the idea that any of the problems people are facing are caused by the 14 years of Conservative government. He won't say how many prisoners they've released early. He won't say if they're burglars, abusers or stalkers. He won't say where they are or what support their victims are getting. Yet he thinks he has the right to tell people they can't blame his government for any of it. Doesn't he think that rather than confiscating lanyards like some jumped-up milk monitor, he should stop issuing get-out-of-jail cards free to prisoners considered a risk to children?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas and absolutely no plan for the country.
Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Prime Minister outlined what he considers to be extremist threats to our society. And in doing so, he actively compared North Korea, Iran and Russia with those people in Scotland who believe in independence. So can I ask him to rise once to the standards befitting of his office and apologise for those puerile and pathetic remarks?
Mr. Speaker, that's not what I said, but I would say to the honourable gentleman that his party is indeed a threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom. And I hate to remind him that that's literally their entire purpose, Mr. Speaker, because when the people of Scotland accepted the referendum in 2014, it was the SNP who didn't.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. What the Prime Minister did was not just equate my colleagues and I to despotic and dangerous despots across the world. He proactively compared almost half of the Scottish population with a war criminal like Vladimir Putin. And he did so as their Prime Minister, as the man who represents them on the world stage and the man who on these isles is tasked with defending their liberties and their democracy. Now, we know that his sorry time in office is rapidly coming to a conclusion. Is this really how he wants to be remembered?
Mr. Speaker, as ever, distracting from the actual record of what the SNP are doing in Scotland.
Click here for Rishi messing about in a pharmacy.